Alrighty, this morning we are joined by Dr. Andy Watts, who is a professor at Belmont and also knower of all things classes in the School of Theology. I've gone to his office many times in order to graduate and get all my classes done. But he is awesome, and I've taken a couple classes from him. I've taken Faith and Justice was what that class was, and I've taken my internship through him, and he is just really awesome. And I'm really excited to get him to join us today. So, Dr. Watts.
Hello, everyone. It's really good to be here. Good morning. Hosanna for those. He comes in the name of the Lord. It's good to be here today. I was here in the fall and had a great time. Spoke on mass incarceration and transformative justice. Today, though, I want to talk on the theme of this series, just the rhythms of life. And I'm going to bring to this conversation some of my experiences. But the first thing I want to do is say that the donkey plays a role today, right? This animal. And so I want to bring in animals a little bit today in my conversation because animals are part of the natural world. And my experiences with Native American people and then with world religions folks like Gordon Pierman, who spoke to students just the other day, the Episcopal priest who also has Buddhist practices. This idea of paying attention to nature on a daily basis is something that many Western people can't afford to do, especially in the culture that we live in. And that's not a critique of the people who can't do that. It's just the culture that we live in and the habits we've created for what it means to be able to still oneself and pay attention to life and to oneself. So, what I want to do is read from some textbooks today that have been important to me. And I hope you'll indulge me reading short sections. And then we can talk about those short sections after I read them. The first thing I want to do, though, is describe the journey that we're going to go on today, at least a journey in my understanding of it. This idea of engagement with soul with place. And place is very important for the rhythms of our lives. One of the things that many people in our culture don't get to understand too well is that the word space is not equivalent to the word place. Place is something different. Place is a ground of, a formation of, and a sustainer of identity. Space is an area we occupy. And so I want to talk about place in that way. I also want to talk about nature because spirituality and nature, as I'll show you pretty soon, are intricately connected. You can't talk about nature without spirituality and spirituality without nature, not only in indigenous traditions, but also in the Christian tradition. And I want to bring that to bear today. So the donkey starts us off because the one who comes in the name of the Lord, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Many indigenous people would apply that pronoun, he, to the donkey as well. After all, Jesus does come in on the donkey, who's actually brought into the journey of coming in the name of the Lord in an interesting way. Now, I'm not suggesting any theology to that, but what I want to do is let that be a starting point. Does that make sense? Okay. The first thing I have on this slide is a human development life cycle chart by Bill Plotkin. Bill Plotkin talks about nature and the human soul, and he runs the Animas Institute in Colorado, in Durango, Colorado. And in his stages of human development, he has 8 of these. Each of them, each of these stages of human development, which psychologists use often to understand the issues that people come to have when they come to them to heal or to cope or to grow. Each of them has nature involved in these life stages. Early childhood, the innocent in the nest. Middle childhood, the explorer in the garden. Early adolescence, the thespian in the oasis. Late adolescence, the wanderer in the cocoon, about to emerge from the cocoon. Early adulthood, the apprentice at the wellspring, new things are happening. Late adulthood, the artisan in the wild orchard. Early elderhood, the master in the grove of elders. And then late elderhood, the sage in the mountain cave. This way of looking at human development is something that he developed, and it's not something that he asked to be an absolute pathway. It's a conversation point. It's a starting point to thinking about how we journey through life, how humans do. So what I want to talk about is this idea of place, being able to recognize place, recognize the invitation to be in place, participating with place and in place, congregating in place, and collaborating in place on a daily basis, which is very difficult in our culture. So I'll stop. Any questions with what I've said so far? Any comments? We're not going to talk about Plotkin. I just wanted to show you this wheel. And we are going to mention a couple of things he says about soul, but that's as far as we'll get with Plotkin, okay? All right. In my work at Belmont in the past, I used to take students on a study away program to reservations in the West during May for Maymester. We traveled to 3 reservations, to Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, where the Lakota live, to the Crow Reservation in Montana, and to the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming, where the Eastern Shoshone and the Northern Arapaho share a single reservation. And there I made friends with elders and teachers, and students from Belmont learned from them. Many of them indigenous Christians, Native American Christians. A lot of those Native American Christians are Catholic. And so we experienced syncretic Christianity on one level. It was beautiful to see Native American symbols and teachings inside churches alongside crucifixes and portraits and images of Jesus and hymnals. And these folks were wise folks. One of the things that we learned was to be still and to pay attention to nature on a daily basis. This idea of all things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small, all things wise and wonderful. That's something that's inchoate to Native American traditions. It's there. The Creator created everything, and all things are relations. So there's not that much divide between some foundational understandings of the majesty and the great wonder of the Creator between the two traditions. The stories are different, of course. So I want to talk about a bit about that today. I'm going to start with a book that I have students read called Neither Wolf Nor Dog by Kent Nearburn. And Kent Nearburn is a white American writer. He has researched and written on Native American spirituality. And this is a memoir-styled book. He was approached by an elder in the Lakota tradition. He's fictionalized the names in this memoir-style book, but he's approached by this elder who had continued to write about his history as a Native American and the Lakota history, and had a large manuscript that he wanted Kent to look at and turn into a book so he could explain to white culture what it means to live as a Lakota. In this book, that project gets set aside, and Kent goes on a spiritual journey with Dan, this elder, and Grover, a friend of Dan's, all throughout the land, learning about what it means to pay attention to the Creator in the land. This is an invitation that Kent received, and he stubbornly and also almost resentfully took it at times because he was not in charge of where he was going and what he was learning. I want to read to you just an experience that he had real quickly. So Dan and Grover have essentially kidnapped, not really kidnapped, but Kent's in the back of a car driving out through all this country in South Dakota. And he experiences many things. And one thing that was interesting, they stopped in this grassland area. And Dan's been teaching him about understanding the Creator and the ways of life of the Lakota tribe in nature. And so they stop in this hilly area, and Dan takes Ken out onto the hill, out of the car, and he says, "Look over there." Now, the hills on the other side of the draw were turning golden in the early afternoon sun. Shadows moved across them like great winged birds as the clouds overhead obscured the sun for a moment, then moved on. I saw nothing other than the lyrical folds of the landscape, punctuated by an occasional dark bush or gnarled tree. I squatted beside Dan and stared toward the horizon. "See," he said. "What?" "Watch." The wind blew the grasses like waves of the sea. An occasional tumbleweed bounced and raced its way across our line of vision. Other than that, there was nothing. "Watch that bush." I stared intently in the direction he was pointing. A large dark clump clung to the side of one of the hills in the distance. From where we were, I could not tell if it was a bush or a small tree grown low against the incessant winds. I stared for a few more seconds. The bush seemed to move. Then, in the next instant, it shifted. It was not the movement of vegetation responding to the wind. This movement had volition and intention, a kind of muscular certainty. Tatanka, the buffalo. I squinted my eyes to see more clearly. Slowly, the large animal moved its head and took on the familiar configuration of a buffalo. "That's amazing," I said. "I didn't even see it." "You weren't supposed to see it. Tatanka didn't want you to see him." I absorbed the mysterious possibility without comment. "Tatanka is more powerful than you know, Nearburn." We struggled our way up the rise. The old man walked slowly and unsteadily. We stepped cautiously. His eyes were in his feet. I wanted to reach over and take his arm, but it felt more demeaning than respectful. I almost asked him if he wanted some help, but the words stuck in my throat. Then it struck me. If he could barely see the ground in front of him, how had he seen the buffalo on that ridgetop almost a mile away? "How did you see the buffalo?" I asked him. He turned his head and nodded several times, as if satisfied with the question. "I didn't see him, Nearburn," he said. "He showed himself to me." He showed himself to me. This idea of nature revealing itself to people is a reality that has often been lost in a Western, busy, business-oriented, mobile culture like the United States. I like the culture. I live in it, but it does have its detriments. It has its limitations. Often, actually every time on this study abroad, we ended at Yellowstone National Park. And we had our own private ranger and guide. And this person would take us back into the places where most park travelers can't go. And we would learn things. And so a couple of times we would walk way up a hill looking out for bear, and they were always there because sometimes the guide would say, "Look over there." We would walk up to a wolf den or a previous wolf den. And so we learned that ravens and wolves and bears actually have a wisdom in life of their own. And what we learned about ravens and wolves is interesting. Wolves, wolf mothers, let ravens see their newborn pups even before the pack gets to see them. The ravens come along and start touching and then playing with the wolf pups, and they become playmates with them. And the pack allows that. And so we asked, why is that the case? Why do ravens and wolves get along so well? Anybody have a thought? No? Right. It has to do with food and security. Ravens can fly and spot carrion and come back and tell the wolves where it is, and the wolves will go there and then piece apart the carrion so that the ravens themselves can have last pieces of it. Or ravens will tell them where a sick animal is, so the wolves will go to that sick animal and make a kill, and the ravens get part of that meal. The ravens, on the other hand, get safety when they're eating with the wolves around. There's a mutuality, reciprocity that occurs with these species, and it's beautiful. The wolves let the ravens see, they permit that, and the ravens let the wolves into their life as well. Reciprocity in nature. There's this idea that Belden Lane gives us here in his book, Solace of Fierce Landscapes, which is a wonderful book. He says that talk about God cannot be easily separated from discussions of place. So the ravens and the wolves live in a place, and humans going into that place need to accept the invitation to really see what's happening in that place, to see the wisdom, the relationships, and the creation that God has made. The place where we live tells us who we are, how we relate to other people, to the larger world around us, and even to God. Belden Lane's an Episcopal priest, and he writes on mysticism and spirituality in the desert Amas and Abbas of the 1st and 2nd centuries. And so he's really keen on understanding that place forms us. And if that is the case, then we have to ask, how does the place in which we lived on a daily basis form us in ways that prohibit us from understanding God's creation? The donkey is important in the story, I think. The donkey is important. And in a minute, we're going to talk about all the animals in Jesus, all throughout the Gospels. And there's several instances where that's important. Comments or questions with the story or that I told you, or what Lane or Nearburn has said? Okay. Thanks for indulging me and walking with me right now. Yeah. Yeah. Nature is endowed with balance. Its identity is balanced, but human beings seem to upset that. Stephen Prothero, who writes on world religions, talks about how many of the world's religions identify that problem and they try to give a solution to it. Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity in a certain kind of way when it talks about sin. One of my friends on the Lakota reservation teaches our students, out of all the people in the world, the four-leggeds, the two-leggeds, the winged, and the gilled, it's the two-leggeds that have forgotten their place in the world. Yeah. And the question is why? And so we're going to talk about that in a minute too with language. Robin Wall Kimmerer suggests that we use language that's different. And she's a scientist, she's a biologist at a university, but she's also a Potawatomi member, tribal member. So she'll suggest that in a minute. Great question. Thanks for that. Anybody else? Okay. Let's go back to Plotkin. I want to talk about soul and place in their connecting points. And I want to make sure I don't go over time. Okay. A soul for Plotkin, now this is just his definition, his way of talking about this in a psychological and spiritual sense at the same time. A soul is a thing's ultimate place in the world. Now we'll see in a minute why that definition is not exterior to a Christian understanding of soul, at least in the mystical and spiritual traditions of Christianity. Place for him is the role, function, station, or status a thing has in relation to other things in the world. So soul is identity and place is relationship. Does that make sense? Soul is identity and place is relationship. And we can theologically enter conversations of the history of thinking about the soul for Christians. There's a whole tradition of, and also a divided tradition about what the soul is when it comes into being, where it goes, et cetera, and the theological heroes of Christian history. But there's a couple of points he wants to make. A thing can be said to have multiple place, but one ultimate place. That's not something that runs against Christian thought, I don't think. I think you can make them fit in some way together. This place consists of your roles in both society and nature, and at the same time, because there's no way we can escape one or the other. To inhabit a particular place is to have the potential to do and to observe the specific things that one can do and observe in that place. So inhabiting is simply more than occupying, is it not? We're not occupying a place, we're engaging it. Soul is the place that most centrally and comprehensively identifies a thing's truest place. It is the very core heart of a thing, its decisive meaning, its reason to be, its raison d'etre. Soul is a way of being in the world. Do these kind of descriptions ring true to you, or at least sound familiar in some way? They do, don't they? Soul is the deep structure, deep pattern of a thing. That's interesting. Greek thought tells us the same thing. Plato, Socrates, that whole tradition of Stoicism tells us the same thing. Ways of discovering soul, ultimate place in the world, are not soul itself. There are many ways to listen to soul. Anything in those descriptions comment worthy or need further conversation? Yeah, so in his book, Plotkin lays the groundwork for thinking about human development, and it cannot be detached from our engagement in our place in nature. So I'm going to go to a couple of other Christian thinkers. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a great question. Keep going. Yeah. That question is a great question. Yeah. And it's one that others have asked, thinkers that are well known in human history. Yeah. So I'll talk about that in a second if you want, but let's go to this question or a comment. Human personalities vary across people, and that's a beautiful thing. The Enneagram, talks about 9 different sets of personalities, and each of them have their strengths and their weaknesses. They can be healthy or unhealthy. And for some people at certain points in time in their lives with different personalities, paying attention to the spiritual is something that might be a little more challenging than people with other personalities, and then vice versa, right? When Plotkin talks about nature and the soul, he is speaking not about the inability to recognize the soul, but the permanence of the soul, whether we recognize it or not. And its call and invitation for us to always flee to nature, to be in nature. And so the egoism that many traditions identify as the problem and the inability to recognize soul, that egoism, it is one that itself is grounded in soul. If we take this definition that a soul is a thing's ultimate place in the world, we don't ignore the personality. We encourage it to open up some insight into the invitation to be in nature, if that makes sense. The spiritual world and the physical world are both spiritual and physical. There's an idea in the Gospels that, and in I think First John, is it First John or Third John? The health of the soul. The writer talks about the health of the soul. And the soul, the word is psyche in Greek, which is the root of psychology. So it's this way of being in the world that's connected to all of faculties, as well as it's this intangible element of being a human being. And by the way, being an animal, if we go to Proverbs 12, righteous is the man who cares for the soul of his cattle. Yeah, get that one in the class, and students say, wait a minute, animals have souls? I said, I can't answer the question, but in the scriptures, there's a couple of comments about that. Yeah. So the health of the soul, and the word for health is physical health in Greek. It's not spiritual health. There's a physical health of the psyche, the soul, which is amazing. Does that get to your question, your thought at all? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I hope that at least we can scratch itches today. A couple of other Christians have talked about spirituality. Spirituality for David Perrin emphasizes growth in persons in community, not as privatized persons indifferent to the broader needs and social concerns of the world. He says that Christian spirituality that reflects self-giving and is rooted in a keen desire to enhance the life of others as modeled in the life of Jesus could potentially provide a positive influence on such things as moral values, interpersonal relationships, and life philosophies. What I'm trying to do is take an indigenous understanding of this very same thing and say that when we actually develop practices of engaging nature or animals or the world around us, then we start to see and understand that soul. Because everything is God infused in terms of God is the creator of all that is bright and beautiful and wise and wonderful, all creatures great and small. William Stringfellow, who some folks know and some don't, says that whatever else may be affirmed about a spirituality which has a biblical precedent and a style, spiritual maturity or spiritual fulfillment necessarily involves the whole person, body, mind, and soul, place, and relationships. Place comes up in this definition. Place is very important for spirituality. Biblical spirituality encompasses the whole person and the totality of existence in the world, not some fragment or scrap or incident of a person. Now, these are definitions of spirituality that many people have not considered before or heard before. Any thoughts or questions with that? David Perrin goes on to say in his study of Christian spirituality, all spirituality is particular. It takes place in a particular context, in a particular location, a particular historical setting, and a particular culture, which means that he's advising us not to think of spirituality as some kind of universal, spiritualized thing that's transcendent above human practice and experience. What is being referred to here is the spirituality of place. This place where identities are grounded, formed, and sustained in relationships. Relationships with more, and they're just more than human relationships. Spirituality, among other things, refers to the possibility of living out a spiritual orientation in the real circumstances of life. That's what I think. I think David Barron's trying to communicate that. I mean, if we think about what the definition of a spirituality is to each of us in our own experiences, and when I ask other people, a lot of people say, well, I'm spiritual because I pray. Is spirituality simply prayer or intentional prayer? And then what is prayer? What is spirituality? Anybody have a definition of spirituality that they've come to rely on or understand that either resonates or doesn't resonate with Perrin's view? Which is okay. I mean, so this idea of spirituality is communing with God. And there aren't segregated places where people can only commune with God. We can commune with God in any place in God's creation. Even though there are fierce debates of whether or not you can know God through nature in the Christian tradition, some say yes and some say no. Communing with God is something that can't be limited by human experience, but it is understood through human experience in my understanding, in my view. I think Perrin's trying to get at that. So developing practices of communing with God through engaging the invitation that nature provides us every single moment. If we live in a townhome in the middle of Chicago, how do we succeed in developing that practice? On the cement sidewalk, we listen for birds. We notice bugs. Oh, I know that's Buddhist, but still. Those kind of things. Or we watch a leaf, or we think about God's creation in the way that St. Francis thought about it. St. Francis of Assisi, brothers and sisters, right? So how to develop those practices is interesting. So Belden Lane tells a story in his Solace of Fierce Landscapes. He wants to talk about the desert and the desert Amas and Abbas in their teachings and how they actually communed with God through communing with nature, and harsh nature, by the way, but nature where there's lots of life. And the wisdom of living in the desert by this life is tangible and it's important. So he tells the story at the beginning of his book. And he says he's talking about a friend of his. His friend is Bruce Chatwin, a British travel writer fascinated with Australia, who tells of giving a ride in his Land Cruiser to an Aboriginal friend on a dusty road in the outback. The Aboriginal man was on a pilgrimage, engaged in a dream trek aimed at restoring meaning to his own life as well as to the landscape. Meaning of his life and meaning of the land, the place, were symbiotic. Driving at 25 miles an hour, Chatwin noticed the man frantically jumping back and forth from one window to the other, chanting the place names of his song line as quickly as possible. Suddenly, Chatwin realized his mistake as a driver, and he slowed the car down to the 4-mile-an-hour pace of a walker so that the man's song could be sung at a proper and comfortable rate. Only in this way could the land be equally honored and their entry into it together made spiritually possible. Driving through life too quickly prevents us from those spiritual relationships. And that's just, it might be an aphorism to say that, something we know in culture, but I think he has a point there. He wants to talk about the connection between spirit and place. The intimate connection between spirit and place is hard to grasp for those of us living in a post-Enlightenment technological society. Landscape and spirituality are not, for us, inevitably interwoven. We experience no inescapable link between our place and our way of conceiving the holy, between habitat and habitus, where one lives and how one practices a habit of being. Our concern is simply to move as quickly and freely as possible from one place to another. We are bereft of rituals of entry that allow us to participate fully in the places we inhabit. I see that in my life. I have to be very diligent and exert a lot of effort to escape that kind of pattern of living. It's called escape, or vacation for many people. But that means that we're missing communing with God at every level of our life every single day. This idea of spirituality and nature being interwoven and reciprocal is something that I think is very important. Any thoughts about that? One of my favorite Christian writers is Howard Thurman. And Howard Thurman uh, was the spiritual father to many people in the United States, many great people, including Martin Luther King Jr. and others. In the 1930s, he traveled to India and became the first Black American to meet Mohandas Gandhi, who taught him the strategy of nonviolent resistance. He advised Dr. King in the civil rights movement as well. He talks about this invitation and this engagement with nature in an understanding of God in two separate instances that I think are interesting. He had an early childhood experience and an early adult experience. His early childhood experience happened during a really great storm in Florida where he grew up. The ocean and the night together surrounded my little life with a reassurance that could not be affronted by the behavior of human beings. The ocean at night gave me a sense of timelessness, of existing beyond the reach of ebb and flow of circumstances. Death would be a minor thing, I felt in the sweep of that natural embrace. During the storm, he says, again, the boundaries of self did not hold me. Unafraid, I was held by the storm's embrace. The experience of these storms gave me a certain overriding immunity against much of the pain with which I would have to deal in the years ahead when the ocean was only a memory. The sense held, I felt rooted in life, in nature, and existence. So his Christian mysticism begins by his understanding God in the storm, in this security he felt because he stepped into it. He welcomed the invitation to understand the storm as something of the Creator. He engaged it and he participated in that moment, living through it. In his early adult, you questioned? Yeah. Mm. Um, yeah, it's good. Yeah, yeah. Mm. Mm. Yeah. No, I think you're asking another great question. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to do that. No, mountain lions like peanut butter. um, yes. So Howard Thurman went to learn a specific practice of nonviolent resistance. He went just for a short time. And, when Jesus goes into the wilderness, as the synoptic gospels document, in Mark, he's in the wilderness with the animals and the angels. They are with them there. Now, it's interesting that Mark doesn't have a birth narrative where there are animals at the birth. The animals are in the desert caring, I'm going to assume, helping care like the angels for Jesus, the wild animals. So this is a retreat to learn something, or to get a hold of oneself, or to understand something that's going to happen in the future, to understand one's vocation, calling, etc. It's a but it's not a vacation. And I think trying to escape the very place that forms your identity is artificial. It doesn't mean that good things can't happen in that way, but Thurman comes back and brings what he learns into a very tense culture when it comes to race and race relations. And yeah, that's a great question. And thank you for sharing that. Um, my experience with Native American elders on the Pine Ridge and Wind River reservations is that the idea of that shamans, medicine women and medicine men do, what they do is they leave for a while and they try to experience a more transcendent understanding of reality, and they do it through one of three ways. They can fast, and that'll bring the mind into a state of spiritual transcendence. You can dance for days without stopping, and that will also bring the mind into a transcendence. Or you can take some kind of chemical. So that's where peyoteism comes from. And peyoteism was not a ritual where everybody took peyote. Only the shamans do it for a spiritual insight and spiritual health in most Western Native American traditions. So if that you experience that for 4 days, wow. I mean, at least the practice. Right. Yeah. The hero's journey, both mythically and historically in a Christian tradition and other traditions, is one that resonates all throughout those kind of experiences. Yeah. Um, heroes for It's so interesting. The idea of hero or warrior in indigenous traditions is not simply a military uh, connotation to it. It's caring and providing connotation to it mostly. And that's something that the Western, hello, come back on, come back on. All right. Yeah, that's okay. That's good. Saving electricity. Yeah, this hero's journey is important. Yeah. So the hero's journey uh, is one where what it means to be an heroic is important. What are people learning about what it means to be heroic? And American mythologizing of, and at least indigenous understandings of what a warrior or a hero is, are wrong. Um, this story that was told, they learn about being a caregiver and a provider for the tribe and for all tribes and for nature. The respect and reciprocity of nature at all times is part of the hero's journey. And we do find that in European traditions as well, European stories. There it is. So Howard Thurman also experienced an early adult moment where with Halley's Comet. And the coming of that comet was so scary back in 1910 for people. But he had a sense that that comet and him shared something, and that was they're both created by the Creator. And so they were relatives. The comet and Thurman were relatives. And that just echoes what Native Americans think about all of life. In Lakota, the saying in Mitakuye Oyasin, all of life are relatives. Two-leggeds, four-leggeds, winged, gills, etc., rocks, trees, because they all come from the Creator. The Creator is the biological source, if you want to use that word. So using language is important. And so this is where I go to Robin Wall Kimmerer and Braiding Sweetgrass, and we're about to end this up. But one way we can practice a daily engagement with the natural world is through the language that we use. And so she talks about in this really good book, she's a biologist, it's called Braiding Sweetgrass, and she tells stories from different tribes of what it means to live symbiotically with nature, all of nature, in the different tribes' traditions. So she wants to talk about the grammar of animacy, which is, she says, kind of encapsulated here in this little comment, listening in wild audiences. We are audience to conversations in a language not our own. Wouldn't it be wonderful if nothing was an it? She's a scientist. She's trained in Western science. She's a biologist. And the language that science uses is very useful, but it's also objective. And to be objective means that something becomes an object. It becomes an it. And the language that many Western peoples speaking English use for the life, the relatives around us, is the word it. And she says that practicing using pronouns of animacy, he, she, they, because dogs and cats are relatives, bears and wolves are relatives, trees and rocks are relatives. Calling them he's and she's not, this is kind of awkward. I understand that. But it's using language of animacy, which then creates a space for us, even in our own backyards, to walk out. And when you see the robin, say, hey, I saw him. How are you, friend? These pronouns and nouns of animacy help us make that transition to engaging the Creator in the world the Creator has given us. This world that in the Garden of Eden, I'm sure Adam and Eve did not refer to the companions around them as its, whatever language they used, in whatever sense it was. Does that make sense? That kind of taking a practical step. Yeah. That's where I was going next. St. Francis is that Christian model for us, right? In his beautiful poem, all of his writings were endowed with that kind of approach. These are relatives. There is a lot of poignant connection points between Christianity and thinking about the Creator's world and indigenous thought about the Creator's world, at least Native American. And we are unhealthy when we go too long without engaging that natural world and engaging the invitation to engage that world, accepting it and participating in it. It is. That's part of it, yes. All of these pilgrim trails, whether they're in Spain or Scotland, in the Western United States, all of these which have been established by religious traditions in the Christian tradition are about that. Now, that's a pilgrimage, but you can take what you learn on the pilgrimages and take them back to your house, your apartment. And you can learn to engage the world, this place that is your soul and gives identity to your soul in ways that will have benefits not only for oneself, but for the world around us, if that makes sense. So Jesus and the animals in the Gospels, I think it's wonderful. The animals are there. The donkey gives Jesus the ride. The donkey does the work. The animals are at the birth, praising. The animals take care of Jesus in the wilderness in Mark. Jesus talks about how God takes care of sparrows. But in our world, animals are incidental many times, unless they're companions. We don't respect their own wisdom of operating in the world sometimes, unless we go to a preservation or a conservation park. And then we see them using their own wisdom to acknowledge the Creator. Indigenous peoples have fought really hard, even on these things called reservations, which were first prison camps, to try to maintain the ability to commune with nature, to remain healthy. And even that's been difficult because of the standards of living and the resources available on reservations. One last thing here from Doug Goodfeather, a Lakota. He wants to talk to us about Mother Earth and Grandmother Earth. And this is what he says. Our spiritual, non-physical relationship and our living physical relationship with Earth are associated with Grandmother Earth. That's what the Lakota and many indigenous traditions call Earth, Grandmother Earth. So in the Lakota way, when we refer to either our grandmother or our mother, there's an unsaid understanding that we're honoring our sacred relationship with the earth. One's parents are always your connection to the sacred earth. This is a very Jewish understanding of where people come from. People come from the people that God made. Now, in the Christian understanding, the idea of soul's origin is a little different than the Jewish understanding. The Jewish understanding, I like to tell students sometimes that I think the Hebrew people were more like an indigenous people than the organized political entities that many later writers seem to want to describe them as. Each of us is a unique child and a direct living descendant of Grandmother Earth. I mean, if we think about that, that's true, right? We're a descendant of Grandmother Earth. And that's God's creation. Each of us represents a living thread of humanity that's interwoven with the spiritual realm and the physical world of Grandmother Earth. All of us together, gathered under this understanding, make up this fabric of existence. And that goes into the cosmos, to other planets, to comets, like Howard Thurman understood. We all share the same mother. We are all related, and we are all one nation, even though we're in different tribes. And that's beautiful. So right now, my wife and I are spending our time watching on Amazon Prime, All Creatures Great and Small. It's a great series. If you've read the James Herriot books, the trilogies, you'll know that this and the understanding of animals and human collaboration, it's just a beautiful series. If you need to escape the world around us, watch it. Any comments or questions? Anything you have to say? Thanks for indulging me. Thank you for the questions and the comments. Thank you so much. Y'all have a blessed Palm Sunday. Yep.